Before I start with the agenda, I would like to ask Ivan, our team leader for the partnerships team of UNDP in Europe and Central Asia, to say opening remarks, together with Sidney Leclerc, who has kindly agreed to step in for Ana Fernandez, who could unfortunately not join us today. So without further ado, Ivan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Saran, and good morning, colleagues, to those, well, good afternoon to some of you. It's really an honor to welcome you to this first in a series of webinars that we will be doing as part of our 2020 ODA learning series, which we're now co-organizing, I'm happy to say, with the OECD. So this is part of our long-standing capacity development series for new and emerging donors in our region, and we have been running this since 2014, but usually we did it in person. Of course, in the COVID context that we'll be discussing today, we had to move this online, and I think it's going to give us a different and actually more inclusive way of reaching out and creating this community of practice that we have been building over several years. It will also help us deepen our work in supporting the capacity development of many of our partners in the region and in seeing development of more effective development aid systems. So today's webinar is the first session we're co-organizing, as I mentioned, with the OECD, and we have been discussing this cooperation for quite some time. So I'm really happy that we finally managed to make it happen, and we look forward to a quite vibrant series over the next 3 months, where we believe we're going to bring you a lot of interesting topics and a lot of interesting opportunities to exchange knowledge, experience, and different ways of working. Let me just mention that, for everybody, this year marks the start of an ambitious decade of action where we need to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals in the next 10 years. The current pandemic and its far-reaching, yet to be fully determined socioeconomic impact remind us only more vividly of the importance of that agenda and what we need to do. So without further ado, I would just like to encourage you to fully participate. We have lined up 3 exciting speakers, but also, the opportunity to ask questions and contribute through the chat function or by asking, by raising your hand. Please do that, and please consider this the beginning of a process. So we hope to kind of see you every week at the same time and in this new online format, and to build this community of practice going forward for us to make development cooperation more efficient. Thank you. Saran, over to you.
Thank you, Ivan. Could we jump right in? Sydney, could you please say a few words to our guests and colleagues? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ivan. And indeed, I'll say a few words. And as you can see, I'm not Ana Fernandez, and as originally planned, and she's undergoing a small but urgent medical procedure as we speak. So we've had to adjust our participation and her participation today. But she did, however, wanted me to relay some remarks and some thanks. And first, thanks to the UNDP team in Istanbul, Saren, Ivan, Bernard, who have been leading on this partnership, and we're indeed more than happy to collaborate on this year's series. I think it's we've participated as the OECD quite a few times before, and we're happy that this year's virtual nature has allowed us to kind of bring organizations closer together, but also with this community of practice and this emerging donor community that we are engaging with. And indeed, that community from Eurasia, Central and Eastern Europe, Baltic states are increasingly becoming important actors in the development cooperation system. And as I saw, the participation list of almost 100 participants shows that there is a strong interest in building, consolidating, and strengthening development cooperation system. And for the DAC, for the Development Assistance Committee, it's become more and more important to reach beyond its constituency and learn from others, as well as work with others on and share the committee's knowledge, lessons, or standards. And in this, if this crisis has shown anything, is that international cooperation, whether it is in health or development cooperation is quite critical if we want to face and overcome global challenges. And it's also with the spirit of engagement that, that the Secretariat has set up this new support modality that we've developed over these past 2 years mainly, that we call policy reform, and in which we support countries that are part of the DAC or not part of the OECD or not of the OECD. And we kind of facilitate internal discussions to see processes on reform in development cooperation have more resilience, impact, and effective systems. And we're happy that we've been able to work with quite a few countries around the world now. And that's why that it more than made sense for us to unite with UNDP on this series. And the topics that will be addressed, whether it is communication, gender or climate mainstreaming, green finance, private sector engagement, are all quite critical components of the development cooperation system, but also fundamental tools to respond to the crisis and build back better from it. And I was quite happy to hear. It was, I think, the first time I entered a webinar where there was a jazzy music waiting for us. And I think to have recognized that the track was So What? And so I think it's quite a good introduction for the COVID series and So What? So I'm glad that we'll be able to have that discussion and that debate today. So I'll close at this. Again, thank you very much, Saren and Ivan.
Thank you, Sydney, for that very comprehensive welcome, and which was great because you reminded our guests and participants that it is not today's webinar is not a standalone event. It is in fact launching a series on topics that our partners have expressed interest in. You may remember that earlier this year, we have had a needs assessment survey among our partners on topics which would be the most interesting topics for you to cover in our capacity development series. And those were the topics that you, Sydney, just mentioned, whether it's green finance, whether it's gender, mainstreaming gender and development cooperation, or mainstreaming environment. So, but above all, the most interested topic was development cooperation in light of the COVID. And so it is not a coincidence that we start our series with this topic. And as Ivan had mentioned, so we will be meeting every week at the same time for our series. So it would be great to get to know each other a little bit more, since that's why we consciously chose this Zoom meeting format versus the webinar format where you only see the speakers. So we would like to encourage more interaction, as Ivan said, and to get that going, I would like to ask Jenny to start the poll. If our partners and guests could participate in the poll. First of all, as you know, that we have been, UNDP has been organizing the Emerging Donor Capacity Building Series since 2014. So we would like to know who in this room today has attended one of our previous events, and who's here joining us for the first time, which we of course welcome you warmly. Let's see the results of that poll. Oh. Wow, so quite a number of people have attended before, and I bet some of them even multiple times, and majority, it's the first time. Yeah, so welcome to you all, and I hope, we hope that you will join us in the coming weeks. So let's see the next question, Jenny. So since we are, as I said, we are here for the long haul, so might as well get to know each other. So the next question is, considering our new reality, which many of us are working from home, let's see who's connected from where. Aha. So slightly more people are working still from office. That is quite interesting conversation that we could actually follow up. And nobody's in a coffee shop. Everybody's either working from office or from home, it seems. I'm here working from the Istanbul Regional Hub right now, but Also, there is a home office modality. So great to know that. We would be very happy if you continue introducing yourself in the chat box. If you could tell us who you are and where you're from, whether you're in Bratislava or any other city, please, yeah, type in your city. That would be great. So without further ado, let's jump straight into our agenda. We have a busy schedule. We have 3 distinguished speakers here with us today to explore the topic, as mentioned, without a crystal ball, or maybe with a crystal ball, what would future hold for us for development cooperation. So our first speaker for the whole series, not just for today's webinar, is Stefan Klingewill. It is my honor to welcome you here. Stefan is the director of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center. And before joining the center, he served as the chair of the International Transnational Cooperation Research Program at the German Development Institute, Deutsches Institut für Entwicklungspolitik. And he is a senior lecturer at the University of Marburg and has been a regular visiting professor at the Stanford University, among others. And most interestingly, Stefan and colleagues have been hosting a series of webinars, convening thought leaders and researchers, tackling exactly the question that we are posing here today. What is going to be international development cooperation in light of COVID-19? That's why we would like to ask you, Stefan, to share some of the discussions you've been having. And yeah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, Ivan and Sydney, and for the entire team in Istanbul and also in Paris. I think it's a great honor for me and for our center to be part of this 2020 learning series. And we are really glad to share with you some insights, not just my own insights, but of the entire team, and also informed and based on a couple of webinars we organized over the last couple of months. Let me just start by saying some very basic things. So the first point is, of course, COVID-19 has a significant impact on international cooperation as such, and more specifically an impact consequences on development cooperation. And what I would like to do with you to frame a bit how to look at those consequences on the impact, because of course we do not know all implications for the next couple of years, but what is our current understanding about it. And the second point I would like to make is that I mean this audience right now attending this series of events, I think for us it's a very crucial one, because this region is important, the sub-regions of Europe and Central Asia as well. From my perspective, it is very crucial that you have a very active discussion about the future of development cooperation, about the future of international cooperation within the region, to sharpen your own development cooperation approach, but also to sharpen the global debate. Yeah, I was lucky enough that I was invited, I think, twice to the Istanbul Center to talk about East-East cooperation a couple of years ago, and I found it always interesting, and it would be really very important that the region and also the sub-regions, that those voices are really heard. So with this as a small background, let me jump to the next slide. And this is, let's say, 3 conceptual takeaways based on our discussion we have had over the last couple of months. Let me discuss it one by one. I think what we are still struggling with to some extent is the question: is COVID-19 for international cooperation, for development cooperation, a game changer? That things are very different from what we discussed before? Or is it just, you know, that some trends we were already observing over the last couple of years, that they are still valid? Maybe the speed is different. And our clear understanding is that, let's say, the directions of trends and changes are not really that different. But what we are seeing right now because of COVID-19 is a quite different speed, and we call COVID-19 a super accelerator to some extent. Let me just pick up a few of those trends. I mean, we saw already over the last couple of years this kind of decline and rise of countries, this kind of quite dominant trend of multipolarity. And what we are seeing at the moment is this is not going away, this trend that we have a trend in favor of multipolarity, but we have much more, you know, evidence that this trend is even accelerating. Another trend, I mean, we were discussing already for decades, North-South cooperation, ODA, and for the last 15 years, at least with some kind of dominance, South-South cooperation. What we saw over the last couple of months is that we see a new trend of multi-directional development cooperation, or maybe sometimes cooperation, international cooperation. Just to mention few examples, Russia was providing medical equipment to the United States. I'm not saying this is development cooperation, but in a way, Russia supporting the medical equipment needs of the United States. China is supporting Italy in this regard. So this is East-West cooperation. So against this background, we are saying we have this kind of multi-directional trend. Let me just add one other thing here, a bullet point which is not there. The need to provide global public goods. I think we saw already over the last 10, 15 years an increasing need that development cooperation is not just serving development needs on a national level of a specific country, but it's very much about global needs related to climate change. Think about Ebola just a couple of years ago, that we have a number of challenges which are not just national challenges, but global challenges. And in this regard, development cooperation has an increasing role to play when it comes to the provision of global public goods. A second trend or takeaway is that we saw already over the last couple of years this kind of paradox, that on the one hand, we have an increasing need for collective action. Think about the huge challenges based on climate change trends. Think about other main trends. But at the same time, we have a decreasing willingness for many actors to support multilateral approaches. So more need, but less appetite to support it. What we are saying at the same time, let's say between pure unilateral approaches and pure multilateral approaches, we have a lot of grays. And those grays are basically what we could call club governance. G20 is club governance. G7 is club governance. MICTA, I mean, this country group of some middle-income countries where Turkey and South Korea belong to is this kind of club governance, BRICS, etc. Those clubs are playing a quite important and increasingly important role for sharpening international agendas. And we think this is really important to make sure that those different modalities, platforms for international cooperation play a much more important role when it comes to tackling those global challenges. My last point here very quickly is what we see, of course, in all countries, including Europe and Central Asia, this huge need to deal with the consequences of COVID-19. We have those economic consequences, socioeconomic consequences. We have a huge need for the creation of jobs, etc. No doubt about it. At the same time, if we agree that climate change remains a huge challenge, which is even with a long-term perspective more striking, more important than COVID-19, then we need to make sure that all countries, developing countries, OECD countries, have a strong focus on green recovery, smart recovery. And this is also true for development cooperation, that we need to make sure that our investments to deal with COVID-19 is really very much in line with this kind of smart recovery approach. Let me just go to 4 practical takeaways. How much time did I spend already? Sorry.
I'm afraid you have 2 minutes to wrap.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I was hoping to get all the time because Anna is not around, but Sydney has also a presentation. So just 4 quick takeaways, and I make it really quick. The first one, I think, based on COVID-19 experiences, and not at least because what we see here in South Korea, this knowledge aspect is something what is very important. Also important for countries of the region, that knowledge sharing, knowledge exchange is something what is important. Look at how many people, how many countries are turning to South Korea to learn about experiences. Not just developing countries, but also other OECD countries. So this knowledge aspect is important. My second quick takeaway or practical takeaway, networks. I think we all rely increasingly on multi-stakeholder approaches. This is not just a nice vague concept, but looking at, for example, what we are doing here in South Korea when it comes to dealing with COVID-19. There's the public sector, of course, but increasingly we are reaching out to the private sector, to young startup companies, to the academia, because they also have a role to play. So networks is not just a conceptual thing, but very, very concrete. My third point, please move ahead with the slide. Development cooperation agencies. We see a huge need that development cooperation agencies reflect on their narratives. I mean, we saw already over the last couple of years a strong need for adjustments when it comes to narratives, but based on the current situation, we even have a stronger need to reflect on it because of a couple of trends. Just look at graduation, for example, that a number of former developing countries graduated over the last couple of years, and this trend will continue. And South Korea, by the way, is also an example. So we have, you know, a quite different setting, and also that development cooperation sometimes has also a role to play, not just when it comes to developing regions, but also beyond developing regions. My last point is, I think from my perspective, what is pretty clear is we still have a strong need for aid and development effectiveness discussions on the ground in countries to make development cooperation effective. This is a very traditional topic for OECD DAC, for UNDP and others. And what we saw over the last couple of years that the momentum was decreasing. And based on COVID-19 and the huge demands for many countries in this regard, we saw really a new need to make this kind of agenda again much more important for coordination needs on the ground, etc., etc. So let's go to the last slide. This is just to say that we have a very nice team in place. You probably know Artemi and others. And we have a couple of nice publications and recorded webinar events. So please approach us, please ask for this presentation and click on the links and you will get even more information. With this, thank you so much and back to you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. This was very, very comprehensive. And I think for those of you who haven't had the chance to join the series of webinars that the Seoul Policy Center had hosted, you saw the link in Stefan's presentation. I would encourage you to look there because there were many interesting inputs, including from ODI, which one of our members on the SparkBlue community had shared about the insights, what could the future could hold. Speaking of SparkBlue, I mean, for those who have joined us, welcome warmly to webinar in progress, our first in a series of webinars on the ODA learning series. If you have missed the first part of our webinar, please join the SparkBlue community where you'll find the speaker bio and more information about the series and the webinar. I think it's a great point that you mentioned, Stefan, the foresight saga. I think that creates the bridge to go to our next speaker, Sydney, as we already mentioned. Thank you so much for joining us during your holiday, actually, due to the circumstances. So we thank you for your adaptability as it requires these days from all of us, it seems. Sydney Leclerc is a policy analyst within the Foresight Outreach and Policy Reform Unit in the Development Cooperation Directorate of the OECD. He leads the work of the unit on policy reform for development cooperation. And most importantly for us, he is our partner in hosting the series, this whole ODA series this fall. So Sydney, if you could you know, start where Stefan left off from the Foresight saga, as it was, and share with us some of your insights from the OECD side. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to Stefan. And I cannot amplify enough that I followed also the series of webinars of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, and they were quite fascinating. And so thank you for that also, Stefan. And what I'll try to briefly do, and also building on what Stefan said, is kind of look at two things. The first is, well, in what ways COVID-19 is impacting development cooperation, and second, what it might mean for the future of development cooperation as we know it. And we'll touch upon, and this is pretty good, a lot of what Stefan has already mentioned. Because as in many public policy fields, the pandemic is a game changer, whether as a disruptor or as an accelerator of mega trends in development cooperation. And if you look at every building block of the development cooperation system has been impacted by COVID-19. If I'm a development cooperation agent in the Congo, everywhere I look, whether it is the country I'm in, the funding I'm working with, my capacity to work has been impacted. So the whole system, and what I'll try first to do is to look at these different building blocks of impacts, and then move on maybe the longer term trends that we may see. Because indeed the pandemic is impacting the countries where development cooperation traditionally operates. And so developing countries are likely the greatest hit economically or health-wise by the crisis, and that can reverse decades of development cooperation progress. And that can be accentuated by different factors: political and social instability, low level of remittances, internal displacement, loss of business and travel tourism for some countries, reduction in national and international foreign investment, accelerated devaluation of local currencies, etc. So the countries where development cooperation operates are greatly impacted and by the pandemic. But secondly, it's also impacting the international and multilateral system. And I'll not go again on what Stefan said, but well, the way the current international system functions in terms of investment, production, trade, but also in terms of multilateralism is impacted by the crisis. And there might be some contradictory signals that are being sent by countries, where some are taking more of nationalist or isolationist turn, but also argue for a strong multilateral response and a strong multilateral system to reinforce international standards and response mechanisms. But of course, for donors and for providers of development cooperation, the pandemic is also having a great impact domestically. And that's relates to the question of funding, but also the question of perception and attitudes towards development cooperation. And while some might reduce funding due to the downturn and priority given to national response, some might also argue that in the light of the increased awareness of interdependency in the face of systemic threat, we might increase this budget. But and that's maybe one of the elements that Stefan mentioned, that the response is also going to depend on the length and depth of the crisis. I think it will also depend on the national and international leadership that will kind of guide the vision on the public values, expectations, and behaviors around development cooperation. And that's also might be something that in this series, mainly on communication, also to the national audience, might be important, and to the national stakeholders, parliamentarians, public opinions, on how this is framed in terms of narratives. And of course, last but not least, the pandemic has greatly impacted the operational capacity of development cooperation actors, whether it is on lockdowns, travel bans, social distancing, have restricted the way development cooperation usually operates. And the forms of development capacity building, international capacity building programs have been largely halted. But at the same time, the new context has kind of accelerated some trends in terms of work with partnership with civil society actors, locally led development. So there might be some opportunities there. So, but if we look at these impacts in maybe a longer term perspective, we'll see that there might be 4 areas and 4 key dimensions around which the pandemic might impact. And maybe the first one is the global governance of development cooperation. And again, as Stefan has mentioned, this might go into multi-directional ways, and we might also see this importance of global public goods and thematic approaches taking a greater importance and being greater lens in the development cooperation framework. And it might also further blur the distinction and the differentiation between donor and recipient countries. And I think the examples you mentioned, Stefan, are quite clear. And also, if we think that also lessons can and should be drawn from developing countries who have been dealing with pandemics for quite some time with less resources and capacities. But it might also be an opportunity for getting greater traction on development finance and some maybe more, I wouldn't say radical ideas such as Jonathan Glennie's that were presented at this series on global public investment, but also maybe some elements on the total official support for sustainable development, USSD, which kind of might help capture the increasing complexity of flows and if we take, for example, the response to COVID, the 2 pillars of USSD. I see you, Saren. So I'll conclude in 2 minutes. If we look at the COVID-19 response through the kind of 2 pillars of USSD, we can see that the kind of the comprehensive nature of the response is better captured than in traditional ODA system. So the first pillar, which is on more of the national response and addressing the needs of the specific context, and the second pillar, which is more on the financing for global public goods, and in this case, health or research that might lead to development outcomes. The second dimension I want to mention is the institutional and operational framework, and development cooperation will probably have to rethink the way they plan, coordinate, finance, monitor programs, the way we relate with partners, with embassies, with staff on the ground. And as I mentioned, it might lead donors, and we often talk of this locally led development, but it might help this current context might help donors kind of walk the talk on locally led development, putting more local organization and governments at the center of interventions. On the might also lead to kind of new modalities that have been created or innovative ideas or ways of working using technical or technological advances, and that's that there might be an opportunity with the crisis to kind of learn from the emergency situation that we were in, and that we can in some ways scale up some of the new ways of working we've had to create over the past few months. And the third dimension is the financing. I won't go into detail, but well, the greater financing focus on global public goods. They might also changes in the way the funding work with partners on private sector, on civil society actors, might kind of reshuffle the cards on the best channels to achieve the desired outcomes in development activities. And since the response has been seen quite an important share of the response has been through humanitarian aid, there might be a kind of a longer impact on kind of the balance between humanitarian aid and development cooperation. And finally, just conclude on the prioritization, since COVID-19 may have kind of long-term impact on the way we prioritize the way development cooperation, the way we do development cooperation. For instance, COVID-19 might be a new criteria to choose priority countries. And that's maybe an important factor. And of course, certain thematic areas might be more demanded. Health, we think, of course, but also food security if supply chains are not functioning properly, or actually maybe prevention or preparedness to systemic threats. So there is no doubt that kind of the COVID-19 is rolling out a new equation for donors to solve, and that and I will use the words of Arati Krishan, UNDP foresight expert, who says that returning to the pre-COVID-19 world is a return to a system that simply is not fit for the future. So maybe here we have an opportunity to reform and to make this development cooperation more fit for the future and more resilient and impactful. And what was maybe politically impossible is becoming more inevitable. And I'm glad that every building block of the series kind of works around those dimensions. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sydney. That was very, very, that is so true, that going back to normal is not an option. Looking at the time, welcome to those who joined in our webinar in progress. So you may have seen in our invitation that we have a tagline for our series, and that is inspiration and action for sustainable development. So inspiration is very important. We want to know what's going on. We want to, we want to hear ideas that can help us. And action on the ground is even more important, some would argue, although there is an argument in that. So without further ado, let's hear from action on the ground. It is my honor to introduce. Yannick, could you stop highlighting Sydney? Yes, and share the screen. Yes, thank you. Mr. Son, it is my honor to welcome you to our webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. Mr. Son is the director of the Program Strategy and Policy Planning Team in Korea International Cooperation Agency, KOICA. He joined KOICA in 2004 and recently finished serving as director of KOICA Uzbekistan office, which is one of our program countries in our region. So it would be very interesting to hear your experience on the ground. The floor is yours, Mr. Son.
Thank you, Saran. Good afternoon and good morning. I'm going to touch a little bit of what Korean government has been done in terms of the response to COVID-19. And I'm going to share my personal experience working in Uzbekistan in the period of the pandemic. As you know, Korea was one of the countries that was hit in the early stage, and also where we can say that we had recovered quite earlier than we expected, and right after the experience of recovery, we started thinking of how to approach to those who are in need in the field of development. As a result, we kind of made a program that's called ABC program, which is called Agenda for Building Resilience Against COVID-19 through Development Cooperation. Okay. 넘어가도 될 것 같은데. So we have basically three categories that consists of A, action on fragility, B, building capacity, C, comprehensive cooperation. And those categories are again categorized in the time frame. Year 2020 and 2021, we are going to focus on the response, quite quick response to those who needs early, assistance from Korean government. And after that, from 2020 to 2024, we are going to focus on resilience with a variety of tools that will be included and implemented later on. And to share what we have experienced on the ground, we have formed websites that can provide useful information. In the area of working with the local partners in partner countries, with different video clips and other materials that will be useful and interested to those interested. And if I more specify on my experience in Uzbekistan in the period of pandemic, well, as we all know that COVID-19 is real and pandemic is real, and people are being left behind. Well, that happens in Uzbekistan, and it's quite difficult for me to see people suffering. I'll give you some examples of how people suffer at the moment. Well, the self-employment income level has been down to 50% of what they had the same period of last year. The number of people in the household working also down to 50%. Job seekers, 68% increased. Job offers, 28% decreased. And well, a lot. There are a lot that can show, and say what happens in the field. And KOICA, our mandate is to deliver resources to the local level and implement programs that can help them, be sufficient to be well prepared for the quick response. But well, we need partners. We need partner governments. We need partner people. We need partner agencies and institutes. Because of pandemic, as you know, we cannot easily reach to our partners. Well, the main way of resourcing partners is to make contracts. I mean, local level and international level, but the contract has been stopped for 4 or 5 months till now, and the response on this issue from the government of Korea and from the government of Uzbekistan, for instance, has been in stock as well. So that's one of the key difficulties that I have faced, and also duplication issues are on the ground level with different agencies, development partners, with their own interest and willingness not to be systematically linked with others. But I'm well, I can say I'm positive that at least Korean government, we don't say that it's time to stop here and see what happens later. We are now trying to increase the annual budgets for the partner countries year 2021, and also trying to focus on SDG issues. We are now formulating and reprogramming our way of doing our job in a way, so that we try to be well sure that we are well prepared for the upcoming issues to be taken.
2 minutes, please, Mr. Son. 2 minutes, please. Okay. Thank you.
And also, we are also open to others to learn what they have experienced, so that we are now trying to expand the partnership with other agencies and development partners as well. So that's it. Thank you. Back to you, Saran.
Thank you very much, Mr. Son, and thank you so much for highlighting in your very last point that you are eager to learn from the others as well. And that is exactly our objective of this whole ODA series, is to enable knowledge sharing and experience sharing and learning amongst the peer ODA providers. And therefore, we have also launched this online platform where everybody in this call is welcome to join, where you can continue this discussion, because as Mr. Son pointed out, I mean, we're in the middle of it, right? And we're in the thick of it. It's not as in we have you know, the pandemic is over and we can talk about the future of the development cooperation. Unfortunately, the reality is that we are still in it, right? So I think it's more important than ever that we learn quickly from each other and, you know, as you said, not to repeat the same mistakes or not to basically what Stefan also highlighted, the enhancing development effectiveness and avoid duplication, and so that we can actually reach the sustainable development goals by 2030. We have already received some questions and I see that we have only 5 minutes left, and I think if you would allow me, I would ask you, those who are interested, to stay on a few more minutes, because I think we have received questions and the discussion, I think, is the most valuable. So perhaps while we monitor the questions on the chat box, we received questions on the Spark Blue platform. And maybe I could share that with you, with the speakers. It says that I think it would be relevant for many of the donors here on the call. It says the economic impact of COVID may lead to further substantial decline in ODA and reallocation of budgets to domestic spending and beyond in 2021 and beyond. How can we, international development community, convince key decision makers to continue spending on ODA? How to shape their approach, especially under the scenario of longer lasting COVID, which obviously the outbreak is not over, as mentioned. This could be relevant, especially for the donors in Central and Eastern European region with limited aid budget. But I think it's a relatable problem to many. So I put this question out there for speakers. I don't know who would like to take it up, and then maybe we would open the floor for others to raise their questions. Stefan or Sydney, I think, I think actually it was directed to OECD, right? This question in terms of the ODA. Do you want to take a stab at it?
As you prefer, I just have, and I think that there are lots of elements in this, and the OECD has produced in their ODA reports kind of scenario based, where there are 3 scenarios: one where there is more ODA, one there is ODA is stalling, and one when ODA is declining. But I think there's 2 ways to tackle this question of declining ODA or potential declining ODA. First, it is, as I mentioned, on the narrative, and I think that's why I think it's fundamental to have 3 sessions on communication, because emphasizing the interconnectedness of issues and stakes and what happens in one part of the world is clearly impacting another part of the world in which we may happen to live, and I think the narrative on global public goods, I think that the pandemic is a terrible but maybe very learning experience on the tangibility of global public goods, and I think we were kind of touching it upon with climate change and biodiversity and environment, but in this case, I think it's palpable. We really thought that. So this interconnectedness of issues and the importance that health systems around the world are fit and are prepared is I think a narrative that is important. The second element is, of course, the effectiveness and efficiency of development cooperation, and making sure that what you do has an impact, and that you can show that impact to your domestic audience and to your domestic constituents. And that relates to evaluation, monitoring, results framework, and all these accountability mechanisms that are so important today. But I'll leave it there. But I think the question of communication is quite fundamental.
Thank you, Sydney. I think our 3 dedicated webinars on communication for development will be very useful in terms of how do you make the case or for advocacy for development. And also the interesting thing about there was a meeting from the donor tracker, and actually if you look at the budget of donors, how much they are spending on COVID response versus how much of that is for international development cooperation, it is such a tiny part that it is not necessarily related to the financial possibility. It's more about, let's say, the will, right? So I think, yeah, I think we will definitely come back
maybe if I
to
can
that.
add, yeah, if I can add
Yeah,
this
please.
element first, it's very context-based. So countries have different traditions of why they do development cooperation and the rationale behind it. And the second element is that this communication aspect I'll leave it there because
you lost your train of thought. That's fine.
So
We'll come back to it. No worries.
Yes.
Stefan, did you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, maybe just very quickly. I mean, this question about what are trends for the next couple of years is, of course, highly relevant. And of course, we have little understanding about it. My 2 cents about this question is 21. So 2021 is probably not really an issue. So what we see so far is that 21 might be quite okay. At the same time, we all know that all economies, including economies of OECD donor countries, are affected by this trend. So even if the ODA share will be stabilized, even then we are going to see a trend in a negative way. At the same time, at least, let's say, with a short and midterm perspective, we have some good examples. I think Mr. Son mentioned already that Korea is quite committed to development cooperation. Everything what we see at the moment, at least for the near future, is quite positive. We have some other countries in a similar situation, but of course, this is not true for all countries, yeah, to be frank. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. So I think the second question on the challenge, the second one was if they see as the ongoing crisis as a challenge to the traditional role of the donor and recipient. I think this is what, Stefan, you already mentioned in your presentation. Is the crisis accelerating this trend of the traditional role of the donor and recipient? That was the question. And if yes, what could be the consequences? Do you want to continue with that one, Stefan?
Yes, just quickly. I think this is really also a very fundamental question. And I think one quite important question to all of us is this kind of differentiation we are using so far between development cooperation and other forms of cooperation. And I mean, just think about a situation where, for example, OECD countries are suffering because of COVID-19 or a similar crisis, and they are in need of something. At the same time, we have sometimes graduated countries, like new middle-income countries, which are quite fragile and which might remain in a very needy situation, but because of the status, it's different. The same applies to other forms of graduation, where because of I mean, we always need to have categories, but sometimes it's a bit too much a formalized approach. So in this regard, I think we should really reflect about how to organize the overlaps. Yeah? If a country is not any longer a developing country, but we might have still needs, but it might be also the other way around, that sometimes you have quite economically strong countries, developing countries, which are not really any longer in this kind of needy situation. So what I want to say, the clear distinction between development cooperation and other forms of international cooperation might be, this kind of definition might be a different one for the future. And that would be really a quite good discussion for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. We had a question in the chat box from, or in the email from Silvia Gavornikova from Exim Bank in Slovakia. Would you like to unmute your microphone and ask your question, Silvia? Are you still online?
Yes, I am.
Yes, please, perhaps you could introduce yourself briefly and ask your question and who it is directed to. Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much for this opportunity. We
lost you, Silvia, we lost you. We cannot hear you. Hello, Silvia, can you hear me? I think we lost her, so perhaps I read out the question. Is that okay, Silvia? Can you hear us? We cannot hear you anymore.
institutions.
Oh, there she comes.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you. Can you? We didn't hear your question. Can you please ask your question one more time, please? Thank you.
Yes. How does you, Stefan, see the possibility of being successful in support of this green approach from the side of the public institution to step in and help, such as MDBs, DFIs, but also other bilateral institutions which can support the development of these countries? Thank you.
I think the question was directed to Stefan, right? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. But I think it would be also great to have reflections from OECD and also Mr. Son. I think what we see at the moment is really that development cooperation agencies, actors are in a way aware about this fact. At the same time, there are those pressing needs from the country level that, you know, we need to make sure that jobs are secured, etc., etc. So this kind of trade-off situation, I think this is what we are typically seeing at the moment. Development cooperation actors are in a way aware about those trade-offs and trying to deal with it. But still it's a challenge. And what might be even sometimes be a bit more a challenge is that you have even much more money beyond development cooperation, what OECD countries are doing, what developing countries are doing with their own budgets. So in this regard, I think development actors could try to provide some kind of advice in this regard, yeah? Socioeconomic recovery, how to organize it. So in this regard, I think we have a role to play, and it will be a challenge, a trade-off situation for a couple of years. That would be my assumption. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. And also in our next webinar, which will be also on the topic of development cooperation in light of pandemic, we will have our colleague George Wuma, who will discuss financing for development and how that is evolving in light of the COVID. And I think there we will also continue the discussion of domestic resources versus also the partner IFI, financial institutions and their roles, etc. One question, I'm afraid, would be the last question in this Q&A session for Mr. Son. Korea made headlines around the world how they have been adopting innovative digital technologies in responding to COVID in Korea itself. How much of it was also utilized also in helping partner countries respond to COVID crisis? If you could share perhaps concrete examples, thank you. You are muted, Mr. Son.
Well, digital transformation is one of keys that we also have to tackle. And well, to be honest, well, just you know, we are in the beginner phase. But well, with the experience that I had in Uzbekistan, we well, as a part of our support to Uzbekistan government, we try to link the model of using IT technologies into the local level activities, such as developing self-quarantine web, for instance. And well, those experiences, of course, Korean companies, big names like KT, they have their own solutions that can be spread out, that can be comprehensively utilized. So well, quite easy for us to start with a new idea, new technology to be implemented in the local level. But still, as I said, in the beginning level, and well, I understand that it takes time for us also to study more, to be sure that the components should be linked with IT components as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Son. This is, I think, a common challenge for all of us, and it has been clear that digital is part of the solution for COVID response, and UNDP in its our work of supporting countries in responding to COVID, one of our 4 pillars is digital development. And I think this is, as you mentioned, Mr. Son, we can only do this in partnership with the private sector, with those companies, and also with the civil society and everyone. I'm afraid, I think the one question on the chat box that was about examples of multilateral cooperation on the ground. I think partners and colleagues have given some examples answering the question. Thank you very much. And I would encourage everyone to continue the discussion on SparkBlue. Oni, could we have the slide, please, on the next webinar series? Because as we mentioned at the beginning of this, we're here for the long haul. This is not a one-off webinar. We will continue the discussions both on SparkBlue and in our weekly webinars, which will be taking place at the same time every Thursday, 11 a.m. Istanbul time. So next week we will continue the discussion with on COVID. And frankly speaking, COVID is going to be throughout the whole series, because this is our new reality. We will deal with it in communications. We will deal with it in green finance, how to shape financial stimulus packages so that it can support green recovery, as Stefan mentioned how important that is. And you can see the schedule here. It has been shared with you in the invitation that we sent out. It is also on the SparkBlue. Can we go to the next slide, please, Oni? So yeah, you can follow us here, and it's SparkBlue, just to for those who are a little bit confused, it's another platform. So you have to sign up to it, like you would sign up to LinkedIn or Facebook. So you have to sign up first, and then you can join this group. And please share with each other resources. If you have any questions ahead of the future webinars, please post them. We will share it with the speakers in advance, and we will also try to answer. I mean, we're not here to answer. We're here to provide you the platform to share amongst each other. As Mr. Son rightly pointed out, we have so much to learn from each other. So I think I want to thank you all for staying longer than planned. Our 1-hour webinar a little bit got extended. So yeah, I want to thank you once again for all our speakers, for taking time and for contributing to our webinar. And I want to thank all of our participants for, on behalf of UNDP and OECD, for joining our first